Hello and welcome to a new episode of Nile TV Newsroom Live. I'm Ram Morsi, and if you're watching the show for the very first time, let me reintroduce you to what the show is all about. The show is composed of a number of different segments. First, we take a closer look at the world of politics. Next comes business and finance. And then we learn more about what's happening in the world of technology, in addition to the latest cultural and arts events, and a closer look at the world of sports. But first, we start off with politics after the break. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi received a phone call from his Kenyan counterpart, William Ruto, on Tuesday, and during their telephone conversation, the two leaders discussed the latest developments on the Sudanese crisis. Presidential spokesman Ahmed Fahmy said they agreed on the significance of continuing efforts to reach a comprehensive and sustainable ceasefire. President al-Sisi and Ruto also expressed their support for peaceful dialogue efforts as well as a resumption of a transitional stage with the aim of achieving peace and stability, in addition to enhancing the development and reconstruction path in Sudan. The two sides further probed means to push forward bilateral ties, especially at the exchange of trade level, in addition to expanding Egyptian investments in vital sectors in Kenya to consolidate the country's development efforts. They agreed to continue consultations and coordination on issues of mutual concern in the coming stage, especially a support of joint African action in light of the vital role played by Egypt and Kenya in this regard. Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry said that directions by President Sisi since the start of the Sudanese crisis to all state institutions stressed providing the highest level of care and hospitality to the Sudanese brothers. Shoukry's statements came during a meeting with the Ambassador Dafa Allah Al-Haj Ali, the Special Envoy of Lieutenant General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, head of Sudan's Sovereign Council. During the meeting, the Sudanese envoy delivered an oral message from the head of the Sudanese Council to the president over the latest developments in Sudan. Al-Burhan expressed gratitude to the leadership in Egypt and the Egyptian people over the welcome of Sudanese citizens fleeing the war in the country. For his part, Shoukry stressed the stance towards Sudan and the need to reach an immediate ceasefire and for all the parties to commit to the truce. He said Cairo is keen to deal with the crisis in Sudan as an internal matter and stresses the importance of international and regional respect of Sudan's sovereignty and refraining from intervening in a way that would lead to igniting the situation and shedding more blood. The Castal border crossing between Egypt and Sudan is witnessing a flow of buses carrying many nationalities into Egypt to be sent back to their respective countries. The Castal border crossing is one of 3 evacuation points from Sudan to Egypt along the Arkain crossing and Port Sudan harbor. Still in Sudan, the U.S. State Department called on the Sudanese Army and the Rapid Support Forces RSF to immediately cease fire and return to negotiations. Meanwhile, a United Nations refugee official said that thousands of refugees have now crossed from Sudan to neighboring countries to escape the conflict that erupted last month. The story.
The U.S. State Department called on the Sudanese Army and the Rapid Support Force RSF to immediately cease fire and return to negotiations. This came as UN Humanitarian Coordinator Martin Griffiths is expected to arrive in Sudan on Tuesday. Ahead of his arrival, Griffiths warned of the repercussions of military operations in Sudan on the whole region. He said the speed and magnitude of events in Sudan are unprecedented, warning that the humanitarian situation in the country is approaching the point of no return. He said the looting of humanitarian organizations' offices and warehouses has drained their stock. The humanitarian agencies are trying to allow medical aid into the country through Port Sudan, but they are yet to receive security guarantees to be able to reach Khartoum. A UN refugee official said on Tuesday that thousands of refugees have now crossed from Sudan to neighboring countries to escape the conflict that erupted last month. Olga Sarrado, spokesperson at the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, was speaking to reporters at a briefing in Geneva. She said over 100,000 refugees are estimated to be among those who have now crossed to neighboring countries, including Sudanese refugees.
The Arab League Council continued its meetings on Tuesday on the level of permanent representatives. The meeting reviewed the latest developments in Sudan. Council meetings on Monday were presided by Egypt, which said it has received over 40,000 Sudanese citizens since the start of the crisis from Kastal and Arkeen border crossing. It said that 2,500 from other nationalities also arrived in Egypt fleeing Sudan. The Arab League meeting coincides with the convention of an emergency meeting of Arab social affairs ministers and another of Arab health ministers. The two meetings are held in response to a call by Arab League Secretary General Ahmad Abul Ghait to create a common Arab stance towards the crisis and its humanitarian and health repercussions on the Sudanese people. Hundreds have been killed and thousands wounded as artillery airstrikes exchanges have gripped walls of Greater Khartoum, sparking the exodus of thousands of Sudanese to neighboring countries. More than 100,000 refugees have crossed from Sudan to neighboring countries to escape the conflict that erupted last month, while hundreds of thousands have been displaced within the country. Fierce fighting between rival generals raged on in Sudan Tuesday despite the latest truce, as warnings multiplied of a potential for catastrophic humanitarian crisis with hundreds of thousands of refugees. Hundreds have been killed and thousands wounded as airstrikes and artillery exchanges have gripped swaths of the Sudan, sparking an exodus of Sudanese refugees. Many more cannot afford the arduous journey to Sudan's border and have been forced to hole up inside the city of 5 million people with dwindling supplies of food, water and electricity. In a Monday briefing, the top UN aid official in Sudan, Abdou Deng, warned that the situation was turning into a full-blown catastrophe. Burhan Doglo, who fell out after carrying out a 2021 coup, which derailed Sudan's transition to civilian rule, have floated multiple ceasefires. The latest, a 72-hour extension, agreed late on Sunday. UN head of mission Volker Perth said discussions involving Saudi and U.S. mediators were underway with the firm rivals of a ceasefire. Foreign governments have scrambled to evacuate citizens. Over the past 10 days, thousands of foreigners have been brought to safety through air, sea and land. Talks on a UN brokered deal that allows the safe Black Sea export of Ukrainian grain are scheduled for Wednesday, with all sides in the negotiations involved. The deal brokered by the United Nations and Turkey last July allows grain trapped by Russia's excursion to be safely exported to the Ukraine Black Sea port. Russia has signaled it will not allow the deal agreed last July to continue beyond May 18th because a list of demands to facilitate its own grains and fertilizer exports has not been met. Andrei Lendev, a minister counselor to the Russian embassy in the United States, said in a post published on the embassy's Telegram messaging app that there had been no progress in removing obstacles to Russian grain and fertilizer exports. Lendev reiterated accusations that the deadlock is a result of the sanctions strategy of the United States and its Western allies against Moscow, which have included restrictions on payments, logistics and insurance industries. Joining us over the phone to tell us more about this is Dr. Sharif Amir, a professor of international relations. Good evening to you, sir.
Good evening.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Sir, what are your expectations for the meeting that is going to take place tomorrow about the Black Sea grain deal?
Well, we all know that the situation is very tense because of the position of the Ukrainian side. We know that the Russians wanted to put separately the case of exporting the grains especially to the African countries, before exporting them to Europe or to elsewhere. We know that the Turks and Turkey is trying to broker, is the broker of this agreement. But unfortunately, the government of President Zelensky in Kiev is trying to handle or to put some obstacles in implementing this, because they want to make it as a bargaining chip with the war that is going on. So I think that tomorrow it will be very difficult negotiations, because simply the humanitarian issue should be put aside and separately dealt with besides the war on the ground.
Yes. The Russians have also said that they plan on putting in their ideas for what they want for the deal to go through, which includes easing of certain sanctions, especially when it comes to export of their own grains and so forth. Do you think that they could possibly gain this when they go to the negotiation tables?
I think that no, they won't get it immediately, because let's be realistic. Everyone is waiting for the so-called spring attack that Ukraine is preparing. The United States wants a tough position against Russia by any means till mid-June or mid-July. But we all know that that we are trying to, all the international community is trying to tell the West, tell the Ukrainians that the problem of the grains is something very crucial, that it should be dealt with immediately. It has nothing to do with the pressure against Russia. The Russians are very smart, we have to say, are very smart in dealing with this issue, because they're telling the world, well, look, there is a war, okay, but why we are making other countries pay the price for it? And they are making their case, of course. They're very aware of this. So I think that the Russians will gain international position, especially in Africa, but they would not gain easily of the sanctions.
Yes, if they do not find some sort of middle ground, which looks like maybe a possibility before May 18th, what does this mean for international food security in general?
I think that there will be a minimum agreement because President Erdogan in Turkey, he wants to show his people before the elections that he's a broker of international agreements between superpowers, that he hasn't lost his position outside Turkey. He wants to show the opposition also that he has the keys. So he knows how to make a minimum agreement. So that's what we're going to say tomorrow, to see tomorrow. A sort of agreement that will not be sufficient. It would not, but in the same time, it would not, answering your question, it would not really create a huge crisis. It will just be satisfying for both sides temporarily till let's say the so-called spring attack.
Okay, Dr. Sharif Amira, Professor of International Relations, thank you so much for joining us over the phone. I'm going to take a short break and move on with the rest of the episode. Israeli strikes targeted North Syria's Aleppo province, killing a soldier and wounding 7 people, including 2 civilians, and putting the area's international airport out of service. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights reported a number of explosions in the area of Aleppo International Airport and the Nile military airfield in Aleppo province, which led to a fire at a munitions depot. The Britain-based War Monitor said there was heavy material damaged at both airports. It also said Israeli missiles fell on defense factories in the Safriya area of Aleppo province, causing damage. During more than a decade of war in Syria, Israel has launched hundreds of airstrikes on its territory, primarily targeting Iran-backed forces and Lebanese Hezbollah fighters, as well as Syrian army positions. Palestinian prisoner died on Tuesday in Israeli custody after an 87-day hunger strike, the first such fatality in more than 3 decades, and tensions around Gaza soared. Father Adnan, who was awaiting trial, was found unconscious in his cell and taken to a hospital where he was declared dead after efforts to revive him. He had previously refused the service's medical care. Since 2011, Adnan had conducted at least 3 hunger strikes in protest at detentions without charges by Israel. Saudi Arabia and Iran will reopen embassies in each other's capitals within days, Iran's Foreign Minister Hossein Abdulrahman had said on Friday, in a sign of warming relations after the two countries closed their missions 7 years ago. Speaking at a news conference in Beirut, Amir Abdullah did not give a specific date for the reopening of the embassies, which closed in 2016. The regional rivals agreed last month to restore diplomatic relations under a deal brokered by China. The relationship started deteriorating in 2015 following the intervention of Saudi Arabia and the UAE in the Yemen war, after the Iran-aligned Houthi movement toppled the Saudi-backed government and seized control of the capital. Amir Abdullah was speaking at the end of his visit in Lebanon, where he met Lebanese officials, including Hezbollah leader Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah. The Iranian foreign minister confirmed President Ibrahim Raisi would visit Syria in the near future without providing details. The visit would be the first by an Iranian president to Syrian President Bashar al-Assad since war broke out in Syria in 2011. Military help and economic support from both Iran and Russia, Assad was able to turn the tide of the conflict and regain control of most of the country. Still on Saudi and Iran, the growing rapprochement between Riyadh and Tehran after years of mistrust was visible on Monday as Saudi Arabia helped evacuate Iranian citizens fleeing the war in Sudan. The Saudi Navy carried 65 Iranian citizens from Port Sudan to Jeddah, and they will fly onwards to Tehran. Iran's Foreign Ministry spokesperson Nasser Kanani called the transfer a positive event that had taken place thanks to Saudi-Iranian cooperation. Ahmad al-Dabas, a senior Saudi military officer handling the operation, told Iranian evacuees that the two countries were good friends and brothers, and they should regard the kingdom as their own country in a video carried by local television. Saudi Arabia, across the Red Sea from Sudan, has been a major hub for the evacuation efforts as countries have worked to pull thousands of foreign citizens out of the conflict that suddenly erupted in April 15th. Revolutionary Shiite Muslim Iran and the Sunni Saudi Arabia had feuded for years, backing opposing sides in wars and political struggles across the region. Saudi Arabia cut off diplomatic ties in 2016 after Iranian protesters stormed the kingdom's embassy in Tehran. However, the two major oil producers agreed to end their rift and reopen diplomatic missions in a deal brokered in March by China. Joining us over the phone to tell us more about this is Ambassador Gamal Bayoumi, the former assistant to the Foreign Minister. Good evening to you, Mr. Ambassador.
Good evening.
Thank you for joining us, sir.
Thank you.
Sir, what do you think of the situation right now with warming relations between Iran and Saudi Arabia? How do you see the future between the two countries?
Positively, highly positive. And it's an expected step since the good position the Arabs took during the Jeddah conference, when 6 Gulf states and Egypt, Jordan and Iraq met with President Biden of USA. And before his arrival, the Egyptian Ministry of Foreign Affairs refused his proposal to establish a pact parallel to the NATO against Iran. And we said in our declaration that Iran is, after all, a brotherly country where we can deal with them and we have direct relations. We can deal with all the matters there. That was a good step, and it was a good sign to Iran in order to resume the relations with the Gulf states and with Egypt also. Now, it is a further step in order to, again, name ambassadors in Riyadh and Tehran. And I want to draw the attention that the Iranian-Egyptian relation is very strong, especially in investment and trade. We have many Iranian investment organizations here in Egypt. Even the embassy, although it is just an office to represent the two countries here and there, but it is presided by a full ambassador.
Yes.
And I realize that whenever we send an ambassador to Tehran under the name of Chargé d'Affaires, we choose the best quality of our ambassadors to Tehran.
Yes.
This means that we keep a very good relations, and I think that the next step, it will be ambassador, full ambassador of Egypt in Tehran and vice versa of Tehran in Cairo.
Yes, since the beginning, sir, of the year of 2023, we've started to see big shifts in the region where, for instance, like we're talking right now, Saudi Arabia and Iran starting to have relations again after cutting off ties, in addition to warming of Arab nations towards Syria and starting, regaining their ties there as well. Sir, what do you believe this means for the region? What is going to be happening here in the near future?
Very positive, because Iran is playing a role behind the scene in Syria, in Lebanon, in Yemen, and many places else. So it will be a good step to exchange opinion that Iran should play a positive role, not against the Arab will, and to encourage the people in Syria to stand behind one flag and one government. Same in Yemen, same in wherever there are differences in the Arab world. And this step by exchanging ambassadors, it shows that good intention is stay there behind both countries, and of course between Iran and the rest of the Arab world.
Yes, Mr. Ambassador, what about your thoughts on the situation when it comes to the Iranian way of thinking, I suppose? Do you believe that the decision to somehow get closer to the rest of the region is related to increased tensions between Iran and the United States, in addition to the sanctions that are already imposed on Iran?
As a matter of fact, we sympathize the Iranian position, especially about the nuclear energy activities. We asked the Minister of Defense of the United States 10 years ago, why are you so nervous when Iran wants to even to make an atomic bomb? Why you are not that nervous if it comes to your place or our famous neighbor who do not hide that they have 300 nuclear weapons, and nobody is opening his mouth. Even when we went in Vienna to explain the Arab position, the Europeans were not courageous enough to talk to us about this. The United States stopped the discussion. Why, if it comes to Iran or North Korea, they are so nervous? It's a double standard of relations. So Iran, I think they appreciate our position there. And I don't think that Iran is coming to produce atomic weapon. But if they want, why not? Why, with the exception of Iran, I don't see any political or security reason for that. But the funny thing that the Minister of Defense of United States 10 years ago, he answered us, yes, because in Iran and in North Korea, they are not having a democratic system, but the others are having democratic system. So we asked him, what if you are the victim?
Yeah.
Will you be happy to be bombed by a democratic bomb? What's the difference between a democratic bomb and the dictator bomb? This shows you that we are living really a world of double standards in many things, but we have to stand, and I think Egypt and the Arabs have very good position in this subject, and it is appreciated by the Iranian. This will bring Iran more and more in our field and to understand our worries and to behave like what we want, to have some very good relations. Mind you that because you are a little younger than me, I lived the time of the Egyptian kingdom when our Princess Faiza, Fawziyah, married the Shah of Iran.
Yes.
By that time, we were just as if one country. And we never talked about differences between Iran and Egypt. Now we have to bring back this sort of relations. And I don't see that Iran, which is a member, an eminent member of the Islamic group, that we do not have a common language and a common way to explain things and to discuss whatever worries we have between all of us.
My final question for you, sir, because you mentioned the Israeli side as well. The Israelis seem to be very nervous when it comes to the warming of relations between the Saudis and Iranians. Why do you believe that this makes them nervous?
I didn't hear the question. Please repeat your question.
The Israelis are not quite happy with the warming of relations between the Saudis and Iranians.
This is a very important question here because we disarmed Israel from this weapon where they are trying to sell their position against Iran to the Americans.
Yes.
Now we are bringing Iran to the international field and to the Islamic field and to have good relations with us. So the role of Israel is neglected now and it will be diminished and diminished. Of course, this step will be annoying the Israelis, but I hope that also we have good contacts with Israel and we can convince them and we can explain to them that it is better for them also to keep silence while we are making our relations better and better with the friendly and brotherly country of Iran.
Okay, Ambassador Gamal Bayoumi, the former assistant to the foreign minister, thank you so much for joining us over the phone. We're going to take a short break and move on with the rest of the episode. Moving on to the world of business and finance, where the ruble edged lower against the dollar on Tuesday as the Russian market reopened after a long weekend, and the dust settled on the central bank's hawkish pledge to keep rate hikes on the table after it held interest rates on Friday. The ruble was 0.2% weaker against the dollar at 80.38 and had gained 0.2% to trade at 88.5 versus the euro. It firmed 0.3% against the yuan at 11.56. The ruble strengthened sharply on Friday, ending 2 weeks of trading in a range of 81 to 82 against the dollar. It reached a 3-week high against the dollar, euro and yuan before powering gains after the central bank held interest rates at 7.5%. Brent crude oil, a global benchmark for Russia's main export, was up 0.4% at $79.62 a barrel. Russian stock indices are also lower. The dollar-denominated RTS index was down 0.2%, for Russian equities guide. Eurozone factory activity contracted further last month, albeit not by as much as initially thought, while the cost of raw materials fell at the fastest pace in nearly 3 years, according to a survey. The HCOB Final Manufacturing Purchasing Managers Index, compiled by S&P Global, fell to 45.8 in April from March's 47.3, just beating a preliminary reading of 45.5, but well below the 50 mark, separating growth from contraction for a 10th consecutive month. An index measuring output, which feeds into a composite PMI due on Thursday, that is seen as a good economic guide for health, dropped back below the break-even mark at 48.5 from 50.4. Input costs falling at the fastest pace since May 2020 meant factories barely increased their prices, yet demand still weakened. The output prices fell to a 29-month low of 51.6 from 53.4. The European Central Bank is widely expected to increase interest rates by 25 basis points on Thursday as it fights to bring inflation back to its 2% target. And back home, Prime Minister Mustafa Madbouli voiced the state's keenness to encourage the private sector and boost its participation in various economic sectors, especially in the field of industry, as it is considered an important pillar of the Egyptian economy through its contribution to increase the volume of production, provide employment opportunities, and raise the national exports. This came during Madbouli's inspection tour on Saturday to a number of housing projects and electronic and industrial complexes in the 10th of Ramadan city and New Abu city in Sharqiya Governorate. The Prime Minister was accompanied by the Minister of Housing, Asim Al-Ghazar, and the CEO of the General Authority for Investment and Free Zones, Hossam Hiba. The Prime Minister held a press conference where he confirmed that the visit comes within the framework of the state's keenness to encourage the private sector and boost its participation in various economic sectors, especially in the field of industry, as it is considered an important pillar for the Egyptian economy through its contributions to increasing the volume of production, provide employment opportunities, and raise the national export. He added that the tour also comes within directives of President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, stressing the importance of boosting agricultural industry and exports and supporting production sectors despite global economic conditions, asserting that there is a continuous coordination between the cabinet and central bank. In addition, Madbouli announced the start of constructing new road networks reaching the new city of Abur, and the Prime Minister witnessed the inauguration of the largest electronic Japanese factory for manufacturing automotive wiring harnesses. The components there were made, and as well, the complex provides more than 10,000 job opportunities for youth. And the Premier voiced Egypt's full support to foreign investments, giving directives to all bodies to facilitate obstacles facing investors with the aim of expanding in the next period the Egyptian market and attracting more investments. People squeezed by inflation and demanding economic justice took to the streets of cities across Asia and Europe to mark May Day on Monday in a global outpouring of worker discontent not since seen before the COVID-19 pandemic sent the world into lockdown. The story.
As hundreds of thousands of people took to the streets for Labor Day to vent their anger against President Emmanuel Macron's pension reform, protesters clashed with security forces across France on Monday. Unions had been hoping for a vast turnout nationwide to rather rattle Macron, who has been greeted by jeers as he toured the country seeking to defend the reforms and relaunch his second term. Despite months of strikes against the bill, Macron last month signed a law to raise the retirement age from 62 to 64. The French Interior Minister told reporters that at least 108 police were wounded, 25 in Paris, and 291 people detained across France, 111 in the capital. This as violence erupted in several cities on the sidelines of the main union-led marches. In Paris, protesters threw projectiles at police and broke windows of businesses such as banks and estate agents, with security forces responding with tear gas and water cannon. In Lyon, Authorities said 54 arrests were made. This as security forces deployed tear gas in Toulouse in southern France and as tensions erupted during demonstrations.
Rich nations are to meet overdue $100 billion climate pledge this year. Wealthy nations are on track this year to meet their overdue $100 billion climate finance pledge to developing countries 3 years later than promised. Germany's Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock said on Tuesday. Baerbock said donor countries met on Monday to discuss progress towards their pledge made back in 2009 to transfer $100 billion per year from 2020 to vulnerable states hit by increasingly severe climate change impacts. The $100 billion falls far short of poor nations' actual needs, but has become symbolic of wealthy countries' failures to deliver promised climate funds. Failure to meet it has fueled mistrust to climate negotiations between countries to attempt to boost the CO2 cutting measures. The United Arab Emirates president-designate of this year's UN climate talks said the funding delays were holding up progress in addressing climate change. Developing economies say they cannot afford to cut CO2 emissions without more support from the rich nations responsible for most of the greenhouse gases heating the planet. Wealthy countries provided $83.3 billion in 2020, falling $16.7 billion short of the target, according to the latest available OECD data. The OECD and wealthy countries had previously indicated the goal will be met this year. Moving on to the technology, a pioneer of artificial intelligence said he quit Google to speak freely about the technology's dangers after realizing computers could become smarter than people far sooner than he and other experts had expected. In an interview with the New York Times, Geoffrey Hinton said he was worried about AI's capacity to create convincing false images and text, creating a world where people will not be able to know what is true anymore. It's hard to see how you can prevent the bad actors from using it for bad things, he said. The technology could quickly displace workers and become a greater danger as it learns new behaviors. Most people thought it was way off. This is in addition to him also thinking it was way off, thinking it was 30 to 50 years or even longer away. He now obviously no longer thinks that. The Times quoted Google's chief scientist, Jeff Dean, as saying in a statement, they remain committed to a responsible approach to AI and are continually learning to understand emerging risks. Since startup OpenAI released ChatGPT in November, the growing number of generative AI applications that can create text or images have provoked concerns over the future regulation of technology. That is, so many experts are speaking up about their concerns regarding the safety of AI, with some computer scientists going as far as forgetting some of the work. Of arts and culture, Britain's King Charles II wore clothing previously worn by his predecessors, including his mother and grandfather, for his coronation next week. Charles, who's 74, will be crowned at London's Westminster Abbey on May 6th during a grand ceremony. At 88, the Polish retiree Piotr Dorek is hoping it to officially become the world's oldest windsurfer, still relishing the battle with the wind and waves as he takes to the water and teaches children to enjoy the sport. Dorek has been windsurfing for 40 years and is known by the nickname Junior, coined for him by his friends when he was 80. He says the challenge is to learn to surf and to control the elements and nature. This is because it is a struggle with the wind, with water, and with a wobbly board. He added that he practices windsurfing for his health and believes it is a way to extend his life. His one concession to age these days is to stay off the water when the wind gets too fierce, avoiding anything more than a moderate breeze. But the fact that he could be the world's oldest surfer took him by surprise. Dodic didn't realize that he was the oldest windsurfer. This made him check the Guinness Book records to make sure. Dodic said he needed to windsurf at least twice this spring to break the world record currently held by an 86-year-old. He is hoping to be officially certified once the witness notification is sent off to the Guinness World Record. Moving to sports, Arsenal are still fired up after their defeat by rivals Manchester City. Manager Michael Arteta said, but added that his side clearly need to improve if they hope to keep their Premier League title hopes alive with a win over Chelsea on Tuesday. Arsenal have relinquished their lead at the top of the standings following a run of 4 games without victory, including the 4-1 defeat by City and draws with Liverpool, West Ham United and Southampton. Arsenal are in second place on 75 points, one behind leader City, who have a game in hand. They can briefly return to the top of the league with victory over Chelsea, who are 12th in the table following a disappointing campaign. Arsenal aim to keep Premier League title hopes alive as they face Chelsea. Still in England, Jurgen Klopp accused referee Paul Tinnery of having something against Liverpool after their thrilling 4-3 Premier League win over Tottenham Hotspur on Sunday. Liverpool led 3-0 after 15 minutes but were pegged back to 3-3 when Richarlison headed past Alisson in stoppage time, with Klopp protesting a free kick awarded to Tottenham in the build-up for the equaliser. Jota then scored Liverpool's winner a minute later, and Klopp confronted the fourth official before racing down the touchline to celebrate, for which he was shown a yellow card. Klopp has criticised Tinnery in the past, saying he should have shown Spurs striker Harry Kane a red card for a dangerous tackle in a meeting between the sides in 2021. And on Sunday, the German manager said Liverpool have history with the referee. And finally, world number 2 Carlos Alcaraz breezed past Alexander Zverev 6-1, 6-2 to reach the Madrid Open quarterfinals on Tuesday's story. World number 2 Carlos Alcaraz is through to the quarterfinals of the Madrid Open as he continues his title defense. He beat the Tokyo 2020 Olympic champion Alexander Zverev 6-1, 6-2 in straight sets inside Manolo Santana Stadium on Tuesday to book his place in the last 8 in Madrid for the second time in his career. Alcaraz will play Karen Khachanov in the next round after he beat Andrei Rublev earlier in the day. In a repeat of the 2022 final, the last year's French Open quarterfinal, which Zverev won in 4 sets, it was Alcaraz who came out on top with a polished performance to beat the number 13 seed in straight sets. Alcaraz eased past Bulgarian Gregor Dimitrov 6-2, 7-5 on Sunday to set up a last 16 showdown with Zverev, who demolished Frenchman Hugo Grenier 6-1, 6-0. The pair met twice during last year's clay swing, with Alcaraz beating Zverev in Madrid to win his second ATP Masters 1000 title before Zverev got his revenge in the French Open quarterfinals a few weeks later. World number 3 Daniil Medvedev crashed out of the World Madrid Open in the 4th round against Russian compatriot Aslan Karatsev 7-6, 6-4 on Tuesday. The second seed in the Spanish capital was admitted he struggles on clay and fell to another defeat against Karatsev on the dirt, as he did in Rome 2 seasons ago. After going nearly 3 hours on Monday in a 3-set win over another Russian, Alexander Shevchenko, Medvedev secured an early break, but Karatsev immediately struck back for a 2-2. They stayed on serve and Karatsev triumphed comfortably in the tiebreak, his ball striking immaculate throughout the clash. Medvedev complained fruitlessly about the shadows in the Aristeguieta Sanchez Stadium, a second court in Madrid. Ranked 121st in the world, qualifier Karatsev broke the 2021 US Open winner for a 3-2 in the second set and only dropped 2 points on his serve after that to triumph. And that's the end of the sports segment of this edition of the show and the end of this show, but stay tuned for more here on Nile TV.